I'm Danielle Gould, and I'm a sophomore at Tisch studying film and television, and I'm also the vice president of the Tisch Undergraduate Student Council. Thank you so much for tuning in. There is so much at stake this election cycle. Climate change, criminal justice reform, a global pandemic, and what the future of our country could look like. Americans across the country are voting right now. Nearly 40 million people have already voted. People are waiting in long lines, mailing in their ballots, and preparing to vote safely.
In 2018, young people voted in historic fashion. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, we showed the largest percentage point increase in turnout out of any age group. We did that despite steep barriers to the vote in many states, from residency requirements to disappearing polling locations.
There have always been critics saying we just don't vote or we just don't care, but this year we're looking to change that. Young people have been mobilizing across the country to show that we deserve a seat at the table.
It has been a difficult year, but this event is meant to show that as an NYU community, we're coming together. We're uniting around a commitment not just to go out and vote, but to do more. This event has been put together by us students to show that we will stand up for our democracy and protect our vote.
There's just some questions that don't have answers. Like, why are New York pigeons so bold? How come every time I get on a Zoom call, my internet starts to break up? Does New York water actually make the bagels taste better? Or are we all just delusional? Will things ever get better? But the one question that always has an answer is, can I make a difference? Because of course you can, by voting. Your vote matters, and you know how I know? During a 2008 congressional race in Alaska, one single vote decided who would win. That could be yours. If you want to register to vote or don't know how to vote by mail, you can visit vote.org for more information. It's so easy to register, it takes 2 minutes, tops. That's like 2 TikTok videos. Okay, look at this. Vote now. Alright, I'm done. Go vote.
Hi, I'm Shiv, and I'm voting because we don't have a choice. This will be one of the most important elections of our lifetime. We're not just voting for whoever gets to sit behind the desk in the Oval Office. We're voting to check on our friends in Congress. We're voting to represent the unheard, those who don't get to go to the polls. It is our job as American citizens to vote. So I ask you to please go vote.
I'm voting because it is one of the most direct ways we can engage civically, but also because it is an incredibly important first step to addressing the systemic and structural changes that we need to make to create a more just and equitable country.
Hi, I'm Berg, and I'm voting to honor those who gave their lives to protect our democracy.
Hi, I'm Pearl's son, and I'm voting because I'm a mother, a daughter of immigrants, an artist, a woman who cares for reproductive rights, LGBTQ rights, and I want to see an end to systemic racism. Now, I know the list is a mile long of things that we need to repair, but we can only get our start by getting out to vote. So please come up with a plan that you feel comfortable with and make your voice heard. Now, a fun fact, 15 million new voters will be voting for the first time this year. That is a huge demographic. Your voice, what you believe in, what you care for, really matters and will make a huge impact. So please join me and vote for a kinder, more compassionate democracy. And I feel really, really positive about the future of our nation. Stay safe.
We get it. You're busy and it's hard to go out of your way to vote. You're not alone. In 2016, about 100 million eligible voters just didn't. However, a single ballot can change the lives of millions of Americans. Your vote can increase educational funding so Jonky can use her scholarship to become the first in her family to graduate college. Your vote can create equal opportunity programs so Estella can land her dream job and get paid the same amount as her white male colleagues. Your vote can fund food banks so Shameen can feed herself and her family. Your vote can work towards holistic community organizing so Wendy can feel safe at night without the fear of being harassed or profiled. Your vote gives a voice to Americans whose survival depends on political representation.
Su voto me importa porque va a proteger a los inmigrantes como a mi mamá de la discriminación en el trabajo.
તમારો વોટ મારા માટે બહુ જ ઇમ્પોર્ટન્ટ છે કારણ કે મને મારા છોકરાને અહીંયા મોટા કરાવવા છે પણ અહીંયા એમના માટે કશોય ઇક્વલ નથી એટલે એના માટે મારે ઇક્વલ કરાવવું છે.
हामीलाई भोट गर्न पर्छ किनभने यो दुनियाँमा वर्ल्ड पिस हुन्छ अनि सबैजना आनन्दले बस्न सक्छ.
Tu voto me importa para que familias como la mía puedan inmigrar con seguridad.
Vote like our lives depend on it.
The story of why we vote is important in order to establish our own personal narrative around civic engagement. It is refreshing and inspiring to hear these stories. Now we are going to go a bit deeper into the issues of voting rights, voter engagement, and voter suppression. Next up, we have students sitting down and asking some important questions of voting rights experts and voter engagement leaders. Let's check it out.
So I'm Sumaya. I am a current senior at NYU. I am majoring in international relations and I am minoring in public policy and management. I am part of the Gen Vote leadership team and we focus on voter on information and panelists and events around voting in America.
My name is Brianna Carmen. I'm the Director of Organizing and Partnerships at Voto Latino. I worked in the past on political campaigns at the local and statewide level in Texas. So currently talking to you all from my hometown of El Paso right now and really excited to just share a little bit more information around the election, talk about why it's so important and how impactful you all are actually going to be this cycle.
So to kick off the interview, my first question is, why is it important for young people to be engaged in our democratic process and specifically in this election?
That's a great question. And, when I think of elections, yes, everyone's focused on 2020, this presidential election, there's a lot riding on it. It's incredibly important. And I really want that to be, the first point of engagement for some of you all, where this is an exciting election to take part in, and also using that as a first step in becoming a habit, becoming a habitual voter, using that as a way to express your voice, think about, issues that matter to you, whether it be systemic oppression, racism, and discrimination in some of the systems and infrastructure in our countries, whether that be immigration, DACA, healthcare reform, healthcare for all. A lot of these issues affect you presently and will continue to affect you outside of college. So I'm really hoping that, you all feel inspired and motivated to go out, participate in this election, and become lifelong voters.
Thank you for that answer. Based on your personal experience, what do you say to a young person who wants to get involved in civic life but does not know where to start?
Sure. So I was in your shoes a couple years back. I had, switched my major. I thought I wanted to be a chemistry major because all of my friends were bio pre-med, so I wanted to do something different. And it was a huge shock to me when I failed my introduction to chemistry course and I realized that this is not a great way to start off being a chem major. And it took a couple years to really find out what I enjoyed. I took an internship in my local congressman's office and rose up the ranks to later run his race for US Congress and won that race. He decided to continue on and run for Senate in 2018. And, being a young person sitting in those rooms, sometimes being the youngest individual by 20 years, sometimes being the only woman of color, it made me realize that, I do have a seat at this table. What I have to say is important. And a large component of that is really believing in yourself and that your experience brings added value to these conversations. So I would not want anyone to discount themselves and say, I'm just someone in college. I'm young, I'm starting out. You have so much experience just for the fact that you bring something different because no one else has what you've lived in those values. And it's important, especially when we're talking about equity and representation and diverse voices making our country better.
So should young people start to get involved at the local or national level, in your opinion?
So it's really up to you. sometimes the local level is a little bit easier. It's more tangible in the sense that, you see someone running for office and there might be different opportunities open to you at the local level compared to the national or the statewide level. So if you're looking to get involved at the local level, maybe they might need a photographer. Maybe they might need someone to run their field program. Maybe they might even be looking for senior leadership. Those opportunities might be more available to you. Whereas at the national level, still great experience. There's just more people, and it might be a little bit challenging to, get those impactful positions early on.
So John Lewis, rest in power, said, "Democracy is not a state, it is an act." What does that mean to you?
So when I think about John Lewis, he is the epitome of what it means to be an amazing public servant. Someone who not only spoke in the halls of Congress, but whose blood is part of this movement. And so when I think of him and those words, it really is this trigger to action, where if you feel so strongly about something, you should be willing to band together with all of your friends and go out there, whether it's marching on bridges, talking and protesting, or even using some of the infrastructure that we have in these systems to push and advocate for law.
Those are all the questions I have for this interview. Thank you so much for your time and for your insight, especially during this time and for this upcoming election.
Of course. My one request is that if you're eligible, please go vote. Please make a plan. You can visit votolatino.org to see what's on your ballot, do a little bit of research. We're also doing some rides to the polls. If you're not eligible to vote, reach out to those who are and ask them to please use their voice and think about the community. So huge shout out to you all at Gen Vote and at NYU. Really excited for all that you're doing and for you all to be the leaders in this position making things happen.
Hi everyone, my name is Taylor. I'm the media director with Gen Vote at NYU, and I am here with Jarret Berg from Vote Early New York to answer some questions.
Hi folks, thrilled to be with you. Jarret Berg, I'm a New York attorney and voting rights advocate and the co-founder of VoteEarlyNY.
Awesome. So my first question for you, Jarret, is many students already face a wide variety of logistical issues when it comes to voting, but I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about the specific policy barriers that young people face when trying to exercise their right to vote.
I think it's such an important question, and when people talk about communities of voters that face barriers, I often start with college students. It's not what folks might think of when they think of communities that might have difficulty voting, but college students is definitely right up there at the top. Partially because young people move far more often than the general population, and especially folks who are heading off to college, or even if they go to college locally, they might be changing a residence nearby. It might be one of their first times living away from home. So because our voter registration system is residency-based, people who move more often face those barriers until we have a clean system of automatic registration, which is not in place yet in New York. The registration system lags people's day-to-day activity, and there's that concern. We've seen, especially around New York, not necessarily in the city, but elsewhere, where people register to vote during these registration drives when they were happening in person on campus, maybe during the spring semester. People think they're registered to vote, and of course they might be at that time. They go home for the summer, they go somewhere else for the summer, they come back to school, maybe they've moved from one dorm to another, on campus, off campus, and they find themselves rendered inactive that same cycle. So that's one barrier that then puts you into either the inactive category or potentially worse. And then once a voter is inactive, now there's special process for you to make sure your ballot counts. So that's one barrier. I think another one, sadly, we see, I'm so glad to hear that the Skirball Center at NYU is hosting an early voting site. That is a very good thing. We want people that are part of a college community to be able to access their fundamental rights in that community without having to leave campus to do so, and vice versa, right? We want people to feel comfortable voting in their community. So we wish more colleges, more SUNYs and CUNYs around the state would host these sites. And that's another place where just the politics of the siting can be an issue. We've seen that, unfortunately, in places like Stony Brook in the Hudson Valley, in those purple areas where there are concerns about having college students vote.
Yeah, awesome. You touched a little bit on automatic voter registration, but what other things can be done to make the vote easier and more accessible for young people?
So this is the first federal election, the first even year where New York has a 9-day early voting period. That is a massive, massive expansion of access. In New York City, there will be 64 hours of voting ahead of Election Day over 2 weekends, and those 5 weekdays in between. There are evening hours. We know that college students are busy, and when they're not in school and class, they have extracurriculars, whether it's sports or part-time job, that sort of thing, their studies. So making sure that people can vote on their own schedule at places that are convenient for them, this is that first major step in that direction that New York has finally taken. And now, when you overlay the health situation on top of that, you have folks that might be away from campus, folks that are isolating and trying to minimize their contacts. So having the option to vote remotely, vote by mail, vote from home, whatever you want to call it, flexible options help protect your rights and keep us healthy so that no one is making those tough choices between exercising their rights and protecting themselves and their families.
What can students be prepared for on Election Day and the days that follow?
So the first thing is we're trying to get folks to talk about elections in terms of voting in October. Election Day is now the last final opportunity to cast the ballot. Anyone who can avail themselves of voting ahead of Election Day during early voting, which is in New York, the same process as voting on Election Day. You're scanning your ballot right then and there after you privately mark it. It is included in the election night totals that we'll get on November 3rd. Anybody who can vote ahead of Election Day should do so, whether if they can wear a mask, if you've internalized social distancing and you can do that occasional grocery errand, that sort of thing. Find a few quiet minutes to vote early during the early voting period, Saturday the 24th until Sunday the 1st of November. Because when we get to Election Day, those who wait, and of course you're welcome to vote Election Day, now if there's weather, if there's lines, if there's crowds, if you're just busy and something comes up that you didn't expect, now you've waited till that last opportunity, and these other options, those flexible options, have fallen away. So we want everyone to vote ahead of time because we know, especially in New York City in the presidential year, we know this from 2016, from 2012, that in 4 of 5 boroughs, the largest incident that we get calls about is long lines on Election Day itself. So these other options are great options, and we hope that students will avail themselves of them.
All right, and my last question for you is, what kind of resources can students and people living in New York find with VoteEarlyNY?
So in New York City, the Board of Elections website is great. If you go to vote.nyc, it's easily the best in the state. That's a relatively low bar outside New York City. The county Board of Elections pages really do vary. And some of those folks at the local boards don't actually even have access to control their own website. But what we've built out with VoteEarlyNY is a one-stop shop where you can figure out what your options are, make a plan, clear options based on what county you live in. In the case of New York City, the 5 boroughs operates as one Board of Elections, but you are assigned to one early voting site and one Election Day site. You can request a mail ballot in seconds with an online form. That's a brand new reform. New York City actually has the only tracking tool, so you can track your ballot in the state. So that's very useful for people deciding their options. We also want people to know that at this point, you should take early action, and if you plan to vote remotely, request your ballot. But in New York, you can actually go and vote in person, regardless of whether you've already requested your ballot or even returned it. There's no danger that someone would vote twice. Those absentee ballots aren't actually tabulated and processed until after Election Day. So election night totals are unofficial. We want folks to know that those early reports, again, they've always been unofficial, but we want the count to be accurate. We want every eligible vote to be counted entirely. So we are urging people to be patient with that. The other thing that's useful on our website, we have a multilingual resource library. There's one-pagers in tons of languages that just outline your 3 ways to vote. The early voting hours vary, so we want to make sure people know where they're assigned and what those hours are. The last piece I would mention is if you do choose to vote remotely, vote by mail, you can avoid the mail on that back end and return your ballot to any early voting site or any election day site or the Board of Elections office. So there are lots of ways that's intended to be a contactless process. People don't need to wait online with in-person voters. Quick get in, get out, cast your ballot, make your voice heard.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining us, Jarret, and for all the work you're doing to protect and make voting rights and make voting more accessible for people in our communities.
And thanks to you, Taylor, and to Roberto and to Gen Vote for all your leadership. It's incredibly important. Thanks for all that you folks are doing too.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Madeline Greenberg. I'm part of the NYU chapter of Gen Vote, and I'm here with Disha Singh, who's going to talk to us today. So Disha, if you want to briefly introduce yourself, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you guys for having me. My name is Disha. I am on the national team of Gen Vote. I help with digital media and strategy, and I'm also an NYU alumni.
Well, great. That helps us jump into our first question. So as a young NYU alumni, what would you tell current students about voting or civic engagement that you wish you had known when you were a student?
Yeah. So I was a student at NYU from 2014 to 2018. My junior year was actually the first time I could ever participate in a presidential election, and it happened to be the 2016 election. And the semester before, I was studying abroad in Prague. It was during the primaries, and it was kind of the first time, that I really realized how important my vote was and my voice was. As an American citizen who just has always had that right to vote, it wasn't until I studied abroad at Prague that I kind of realized how sacred it was. The Czech Republic hadn't always been the Czech Republic. So it actually became the Czech Republic 30 years ago in 1990. And prior to that, it was under the communist rule, and it was known as Czechoslovakia. And all my professors at NYU Prague, they were all people who had lived through living in a party and a state where their voices weren't heard. And they also lived through, and some of them even led the Velvet Revolution. So they really taught us about their firsthand experience, how important it was to vote. And when the primaries came around, they're like, you guys all get there, use your vote, have your voice heard. It's so important. And, they really explained how important our voices were. And it was something that I took for granted. I never had to fight for my voice ever, my vote ever. It was something I was born with. It was something that I've always had the right to do. And it was something that I could have never imagined not having in America, as an American citizen, not having the right to vote. And here we are in 2020, and I'm learning about all the different barriers that are in place to having our generation's voices heard. And it wasn't really until I joined Gen Vote that all of these issues kind of came about, and I was so aware. So I really wish that as a student at NYU, there wasn't an NYU Gen Vote when I went there, but I wish there was, and I wish I was more educated on voting rights, youth voter rights, and voting suppressions while I was still in school.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So moving on from there, what kind of work are young people and students doing across the country to get out the vote?
Yeah, so this year, I would say there's been a really predominant shift in youth activism and social media. So Pew Research Center, they actually came out with this study this year, and it talks about how 60% of young social media users from 18 to 29, they're super engaged on social media with social justice issues and political issues they care about. Over half of them go to social media first to express their political opinions. And these numbers in 2020 are higher than any other year. And there are reasons for that. Young people are at the forefront of so many causes. They're at the forefront of public health in the pandemic, climate change, Black Lives Matter, gun reform, police reform, immigration, healthcare. Young people have been using social media to amplify all these movements and all these causes they care about. So they're sharing infographics on Instagram stories, they're creating TikToks explaining these issues, they're tweeting at government officials, they're really spreading all this information digitally in a way that's never been done before. And part of that reason is because this year is so different than any other year, right? There's a pandemic going on. It's something we've never experienced. A lot of the ways that we would normally organize in person are not happening. They're paused, they're delayed. So social media is being used by these young people and really used to amplify the causes they care about. And in a similar way, having cause be at the heart of the election for young people this year, they've been spreading information about voting in the same way to get out the vote. So amplifying their posts to help their peers find out about voter registration, voting deadlines, early voting, voter hotlines, spreading that message within their group chat, getting people to be on the same level so that they can vote for change and get the causes they care about out.
So it's so refreshing to hear that. And my final question for you is a pretty simple one. It's just, what does it mean to be a person that fights for youth voting rights? What does that mean to you?
Yeah. Our generation, I would say, is extremely unique. We are the largest multiracial generation to date. We are also the largest voting bloc this year. Our generation is passionate about causes. We're large in numbers and we're all ready for reform. So it's really no surprise why we hear older generations feel threatened by us, or older generations are scared, especially those that are so used to the status quo and so used to things running the way they are. It's no surprise that they've implemented these barriers in place to make it difficult for our generation's vote to be heard. So when you ask what does it mean to fight for youth voting rights, fighting for youth voting rights is for fighting for all these causes that young people care about. It's fighting for the chance to have our voices heard about issues that matter the most to us. And it's about fighting not just for protecting our generation's vote, but also our future, you know? So ways that we fight for our youth voting right, it means we get out there and we ensure that our ballots are casted safely and successfully. It means engaging with democracy at a deeper level. Voting is just the start, it's the bare minimum. It means engaging in politics at every level of government, so not just federal. It means staying involved in local politics even once election season is over. And it means changing the narrative, right? It's our country, it's our world, and it's our future at stake too, so we should all be fighting for it. That's what youth voting rights means to me, and for people who are looking to get involved with it, there are great organizations like Generation Vote that can help lead you in many different ways to engage with democracy.
As we have heard from our experts, understanding the barriers surrounding the vote is critical. It's not enough to simply just vote, especially when so many votes in this country are restricted and suppressed. It is important to advocate and bring resources to family, friends, and the people so that those who can vote have a plan of doing so, and some of those who cannot vote feel better represented. The push to suppress the youth college vote, and just the youth vote in general, has accelerated in previous years and coming up into this election. So I call you all to have a detailed plan to vote, as well as encouraging others to not just pledge to vote, but to have a plan of doing so. If voting early in person, know where your polling location is, its hours, how are you getting there, etc. These things are really important.
So I'm Cristina Beltrán. I'm an associate professor here in the Department of Social and Cultural Analysis at NYU. I'm a political scientist by training, and my focus is in political theory, Latinx politics, race, gender, and sexuality politics. I'm Chicana. I am Mexican-American, born in Los Angeles. My father was a labor organizer, was an auto worker, worked for the United Auto Workers, became a labor organizer, but initially worked on the line as an auto worker. My mom worked in healthcare. And so I came from a very political family who always really cared that, that thought our voices mattered and we should be a part of what's going on in the world.
Awesome. Okay. So, Professor Beltrán, I wanted to ask you, what do you say to some of us young people who have lost faith in electoral politics as our communities see little to no change?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question. And I think that the larger issue of cynicism or frustration with our broken political system, I mean, I think sometimes we've ended up with the elections we've had because people feel like the system is broken and they want to, deal with that fact, with the feeling that the system is broken, that it's not working. And I think young people in particular, when they think of the issues that most affect them, whether that's climate change or racial justice, there's a lot of frustration out there. I think the thing that I would want people to most understand about that feeling of frustration is acknowledging the reality of it, that our political system is in some really critical ways broken. I think the fact that there's a variety of institutions that make it incredibly hard to govern. Things like the filibuster in Congress make it very hard for legislation to pass. And I think that a lot of times politicians have sold voters a story that is not true, which is that if I'm this extraordinary person, I will be able to cut through and make all these dramatic changes in our politics, if only you elect me. And I think we get really attached to the person. And we haven't had a chance to really look at the process. And so I think the system is, in many critical ways, needs deep reforms to work better. But that also leads me to why people have to participate, because if the system is broken in some critical ways, we have to fix it. I think the big lesson for this generation and for my generation and those going forward is that Superman's not coming. Nobody is coming to save us at this point. We are in serious situation right now in terms of climate, in terms of guns, in terms of racial justice, in terms of the very functioning of our democracy, and we have to fix it. So if you think our electoral system is broken, you are not wrong, but the only way it's going to be fixed is by us transforming it through participating in it and engaging it, electing better people committed to democratic reform, and making it better. But that's really the only way it's going to get fixed. So I think it's very right to recognize that it's broken, but that we have to fix it because no one's coming to fix it for us. And if it's not fixed, our lives are going to get worse, more violent, and more dangerous. And we're going to have less and less of a say in our politics unless we fix it. So it's a crisis, and it's a crisis that we have to solve. So it's pretty serious stuff right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And along this line of kind of systems and possible barriers, I wanted to ask you, in American politics, there has been, at least since the passage of the 26th Amendment, a large amount of skepticism around young voters, right? Will they turn out? Is this voter apathy? Can you talk a bit about what kind of barriers young people face when it comes to actually exercising their right to vote?
Right. Well, that's a really great question. And I think that it comes from a variety of forces. I think one really big issue is that elections tend to focus on getting out voters who vote regularly. So this ends up really harming young people, people of color, Latinx populations in particular, because one of the things that has to happen is how do you make non-voters into voters? And turning non-voters into voters, getting people democratically engaged in electoral politics requires organizing and being present in communities and really making it something that people know they can do, that they know is important. And I think, a lot of times for young people, they don't even get asked to vote very often. They don't get reached out to in the ways that elderly voters get reached out to. Politicians go after already existing electoral groups, and young people often don't even get contacted by campaigns. So I think part of it is that institutionally, campaigns don't typically reach out to young voters. I think the other issue often is that young people move a lot more. So if you're not settled, if you're not a homeowner and you're not settled in a certain space, so that becomes an issue. Some candidates and it happens to be right now focused in the Republican Party. There's often a lot of efforts at trying to lower vote tallies, trying to suppress the vote sometimes. So sometimes they make it harder for college students to vote. But I think often for young people in general, political science data has shown, I'm a political scientist by training, and political science has shown that people who are lower income, younger, and with less education often participate less than people who are older, with more money and more education. So younger voters are still in the process of getting educated around these issues often, and much of the social media they consume, the popular culture they consume, nothing is really inviting them into our democracy. And so I think that's a really big issue. One thing I often say to students is, you know, there are a million opportunities for you to be a consumer, right? I mean, you can't spend a day without being invited to buy something. It comes in on your phone, you see it on your, you know, online. You're constantly being invited to buy something, to spend money, to eat something, to order something. What you're not being invited to do regularly is to be a citizen, to be an active, engaged citizen. You don't get that kind of constant effort to be a part of your political system. And, you know, I think we've seen a decline in funding of civic education. So in a lot of schools and high schools and colleges, people aren't, if you're not a politics major or somebody who's just kind of politically minded, you can live your life without, you know, being really invited into thinking about civic life. And I think that's a real problem for young people, because no matter what you decide to do in your life, you know, with your career or the things you care about, politics matters to all of us because you live in the world with other people, and the decisions of other people impact your daily life. And so we don't educate people to think about that. Civic education should be part of every single year of being in school, because no matter what job you take, you're going to be a citizen of someplace. You're going to be a member of a polity. And we don't talk to young people enough about both their responsibility that carries, and also what the issues are, what's at stake. And so I think that combination makes it very difficult for young people to see themselves as being invited into the system. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that line, you know, I wanted to also ask you, how do we make the principles of democracy a part of our everyday life, right? You're talking about, you know, us as young people getting involved, becoming citizens, and being fully civically engaged. What does that look like, or what can that look like every single day?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question, because we should be treating citizenship not as a status, but as a practice. That if you want to be part of a self-governing society, if you want to be a part of a society where things are done by you rather than to you, right? And I think that's really the fundamental choice in a democracy, or in our political system. Either you're going to be part of the decisions that shape your life, or somebody else is going to be doing things to you, right? You're either going to be an actor in this, or you're going to be somebody who's somewhat victimized by that process. So that's the choice, right? So I think that one thing we have to really talk about is, how do we make people see themselves as being civically engaged on a regular basis beyond voting? So I think part of that is, I think a lot of people are political in all these ways that don't include voting. So I think it's always really important to recognize that voting is one part of the story. I think it's a critical part of the story. And I will say this as somebody who wrote a lot about social movements and left organizing. A lot of my research has been on Latinx communities in social movement context, in the Chicano movement and the Puerto Rican movement, and organizations like the Young Lords Party, and migrant activists marching for immigrant rights. I've always been very interested in social movement politics, because I think that's a way that a lot of people are political in their daily life. They're political on social media. So I think young people often get a bad rap because they're thinking really deeply and seriously about all kinds of social issues, but that may or may not translate into how voting fits into that. But I was going to say, I emphasized often sort of social movement organizing because I thought it was a more vibrant space for people to feel political and to do politics. And I still think that's a really vital place. But I think one thing that the left and a lot of progressives did, and I think it was a mistake, is that we seeded electoral politics. We didn't emphasize electoral politics the way that other segments of the United States did. And I think we have to really take up the idea of the importance of voting as a critical component to civic engagement. Not the only part, but a really critical part of our toolkit in order to build institutions that work. We need to be engaged in electoral politics. And I think that that is an element of this. But I think a big part of this is recognizing that our system is set up to make us spectators in politics. Our system is set up to run very well with most of us not being active. And that's one of the kind of dangers of representative government, is that it can make it very easy for us to just become passive spectators. So I think one thing we have to think about is, how do we understand ourselves as not in a sprint, but in a marathon, that your regular life is involved in taking an interest in public issues and being involved in it. And we have to see that as part of our regular life from when we're young to when we die. Like that, it's a lifetime affair. And there might be times where you're really involved in really intense activism, and there might be other periods of time where you're really involved in your career and you're doing, different kinds of political work. But that, we should be imagining, all of us should be imagining ourselves, for example, as maybe you want to run for office, right? We shouldn't cede electoral office to the people who are really ambitious and only want to be politicians. That's great if some people knew from when they were 9 years old they wanted to be politicians. But I think all of us should be thinking, is there a period of my life that I could serve in political life, that I'd be a city council member or a member of my school board or run for a state assembly or Congress? Maybe for 10 years of my life, I'll be part of that part of my life. I'll be involved in that. We should be imagining ourselves as both participating as voters, as citizens, but we should also be imagining ourselves as people who run for office, that's part of the story of my life. Maybe in your 40s, you decide to run for office, and then you serve for 10 years or 8 years or 12 years, and then you do something else. I think having citizen engagement, citizen politicians, that should be how we imagine the arc of our lives, as sometimes I'm an activist, sometimes I'm an elected official, sometimes I'm an organizer. That should be part of our story of who we are. And right now, we are mostly structured as kind of passive spectators who are asked to periodically participate. We need to really reconceive citizenship as an active practice that is a lifetime activity, and that we do it because there's no way our system is going to work unless we rethink this. Because I think this is a really key point. You can't have good government without good citizens. So if you think you can just watch politics and complain about it, it will never get better, because the system, when it's bad, its badness is dependent on our passivity and our disengagement. It thrives on us not being involved. So when we are disengaged, the worst elements of our system are thrilled because they get to run wild over it. So if you think our government is broken, fix it. You have to be a part of fixing it. Not the Superman who comes in and solves it, but you have to be a part of fixing it because it is broken. And it thrives on you not being involved so it can stay broken. Because a lot of people are making a lot of money on a system that's not working. And it's not going to be different until we all recommit to it.
Yeah, I think that was great, and thank you so much, Professor Beltrán. I think Adrian, I think we
can I add one thing?
Yeah, please go on. Go ahead.
This election, I wanted to say one quick thing, because I think everybody's been saying this, and I think it sounds kind of hyperbolic and over the top, but I think this is the most important election of my lifetime, and I think of your lifetime and other people's lifetimes. I think one thing I wanted to just say to folks who are excited about this election and committed to this election is that I think we misunderstand voting. And I think we misunderstand voting because we view voting as if I am giving my vote as a kind of gift, right? That I'm giving my support to this person, and I am sort of gifting them with my support. And so if I don't really like them, I'm going to withhold my gift because they don't deserve my support. And I think that's one of the logics of how we treat voting sometimes, is as if we're gifting that we're expressing some kind of love of the candidate or some sort of that kind of dynamic of gifting them our vote. I think it's really important we rethink this, that this is not an episode of The Bachelor, right? We're not giving our rose to the person we most adore. I will tell you frankly that very often in elections, the person who wins the nomination was not my first choice, right? So to be a voter is to some extent experience a certain amount of disappointment. I have been through many elections where the person I most thought was the best to lead didn't get the nomination. But what voting is voting is leverage. Voting is you having a stake. Voting is you having, it's you exerting power. So I think it's important we think about voting as an exertion and an assertion of your political power, not your gifting of them your support. You know, that you are actually you are committing yourself to being somebody they have to pay attention to. Because if you're part of the coalition that elected them, they need you for the future. If you're not part of the coalition that elected them, they can continue to ignore you, right? So if you want to change policing in this country, that means you need to vote for officials at the local level that make decisions about police forces, right? Mayors and attorney generals, et cetera. So if you want to have a say, I think voting is really about you putting yourself out there and making an assertion and claiming power. It's about claiming something and saying, I want to have a say in this, and I am making a commitment to holding you accountable. So voting is an assertion of your power and accountability. It's not about making them feel like you adore them. And there are times when we elect people that we really think are fantastic, and that's great. But voting shouldn't be something we only do when we're in love with the candidate. It's not about the candidate, it's about us. And it's about you as a voter deciding that you want to have some power and some say in the politics we live in now. So that's the last thing I'd like to share.
I'm voting because so many Americans have struggled and even died to expand the right to vote. It is an honor to exercise that right.
Vote. I always vote, and I want you to vote because I believe in a just society where everyone's voice is heard in the pursuit of a more equitable future. Our vote is our voice. It matters every single time we use it. We must speak up and we must vote.
And now a clip from a conversation between Dean of Tisch School of the Arts, Allison Green, and former Hamilton star, Javier Munoz.
It's start with yourself. Make sure you're registered to vote. Make sure you know where you're voting. If you got your early ballot or not, or you're going to go in person or not, have your plan ready to go. And if you are voting in person, bring a chair, bring a book, you know, a mask and your gloves and your what do you call it?
Hand sanitizer.
Bacterial. Yes. Bring all the stuff so that you can camp out, because we don't know how long we'll be at these voting polling locations. But once you've got yourself in place, reach out to your friends, reach out to your family, make sure people are registered. And if they're not, help them.
Hi, I'm Kindy, and I'm voting because this is my first year finally being old enough to vote, and I want my voice to count. I'm an activist, and I want all the protests we go to work towards policy changes, and that can only happen if we vote the right people into office.
At 16, you drive some cars, and at 21, you can go to bars. At 17, you're the dancing queen. But just what happens at 18? You're an adult finally. You can participate in democracy. Vote red or blue or even green. That's what happens when you turn 18. Now, due to current events, it totally makes perfect sense that we will have to vote by mail, so our democracy will prevail. Just go to this website now and request a ballot. It'll tell you how, and once it's all filled out and done, you send it in. I promise it'll be fun. As the youngest voting generation, it's our moral obligation to use our voices for the cause and vote for candidates and laws. Tell your peers and tell your friends that this is where the silence ends. Although we all may be remote, the time has come, so get up and vote.
Hello, my name is Devontae Hines, aka Blood Orange, and I'm super excited to be joining NYU this year as an artist in residence at the Tisch School's Clive Davis Institute of Recorded Music, where I myself, I'm an English citizen, but I'm a permanent resident in America and I've lived there for the last 14 years. I can't vote in this election, but I'd be an enormous hypocrite to not acknowledge the privileges that I have in regards to being able to live in America. So it is so important to vote. I wish I could, and I'm trying to do everything I can to help encourage others to vote, because if you want a change and if you want the things that are important to you to be in effect in the future, this is the only way. I know the system is broken and I know how annoying it is, and I know that maybe you don't care about any of the candidates that are an option. Try and look into the propositions that are trying to get passed. Like, try and understand the system and use it. Use it for your own gain, because we have to protect all of us. We have to support all of us. We're living here and we have to work within it before we can dismantle it. So I strongly encourage you, for the lives of Black and brown people, LGBTQIA, trans people, indigenous people. This is very important. Please vote.
We're here with Dylan and Laura of 100 Gex, who are the 2020-2021 Clive Davis Institute of Recorded Music artists in residence.
That's us.
With the election 2 weeks away, we want to take a moment to ask about why voting matters this year.
I know that the school has to remain nonpartisan, but like, come on. I'm
always vote.
I'm certainly not. I mean, I think that it's a complex issue with
very
people being, disenfranchised, one, and also the need for direct action as opposed to voting, or not as opposed to voting, but in addition to voting. Yeah. I mean, like, but I think that it will facilitate change. One, to be nonpartisan, one of the candidates will facilitate change, and one will actively resist it as hard as possible. I mean, you might say that's nonpartisan, but I think that it seems like pretty clear that one person is going to resist any social progress or even go into social regression. Yeah. So yeah, I mean,
please vote.
Fuck them both, but one is going to make times easier, seemingly. It's easier to make good changes happen.
Awesome. Thank you.
And that concludes the Our Lives, Our Vote rally. Thank you so much for attending this event. If you are looking for more resources, you can visit the NYU Votes webpage and the Gen Vote NYU social media.
Again, thank you all so much for coming. This event has been brought to you by and through the collaboration of Gen Vote at NYU, the Tisch Undergraduate Student Council, Skirball Theater, NYU Votes, and GenVotes US. Good night, everybody.